And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends. Happy Free to Choose Friday, and welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense, and also, of course, bring engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out. Today is the second edition of what we're calling Free to Choose Friday, where every Friday is about freedom, different aspects of freedom, mostly economic, but not always economic. And in a lot of ways, it is paying tribute to the great late economist of the 20th century, Milton Friedman. In 1980, he had a series called Free to Choose, which was based off of his book of the same name, Free to Choose, a seminal work in free market literature and economic literature altogether, a literature of freedom. And this is how Milton Friedman always opened the show. The great late Milton Friedman always talked about individual choice. You see, as human beings, we are free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And we ought to be, since we can think, we can reason through problems, and we should not rely upon the government to provide for us. You know, we're in a crisis today. We're in a national crisis today, and it's not just one of coronavirus as a pandemic. This crisis is also a crisis of confidence in government, whether we think government has not stepped up enough or has stepped up too much, whether you believe that government is capable of handling these crises and therefore should, or government is not and therefore should not. The question we will all have to answer when it is all said and done, after this crisis has abated, and we look back and we say, okay, how did the government handle it? Where do we need to go from here? The question we need to ask is which of these two lessons we are to learn. One, the government didn't do enough. It needs to step it up and provide more for the people so that it can offset any crises like this when they come up, so that it can prevent more crises that may come about. Or number two, We can't trust the government to do that. We can't rely upon the government to provide for us because it is incapable of doing so. And truly, it should not do so. Because government has a primary responsibility of protecting the rights of the individual. It's one of the themes we've hit hard on this program in our first 35 or so episodes, is that government's role is to protect the rights of the individual, not to simply subordinate it, as we discussed yesterday, to society's interests. Moreover, government all too often causes problems, is the root cause of the problems, not market failure, but government failures. It's what we saw with the 2008 financial crisis, for example, of policies forcing banks to give out loans and incentivizing banks to give out loans to people who wouldn't be able to pay them back, hence the subprime mortgage crisis and the financial collapse. Right now, as far as this crisis pandemic, the federal government and state governments were unprepared in their own way. It is the job of government to provide for a little bit of support in a crisis, but they didn't stockpile the resources that they should have from a national standpoint or from state standpoints, although we were able to see the private markets step up and fill the void. But then the government goes in and says the way in which to address this crisis is simply to shut down the economy. And we're going to make it, for the beginning part of the crisis, we're going to make it more difficult for testing to take place because we have regulations and we have one type of test that's allowed in the United States produced by the Centers for Disease Control, the only test. That's how it began, only one test. And it took weeks for the FDA to finally open up to other manufacturers of tests and to allow for antibody testing. We've seen challenges with being able to provide treatments to individuals who have been suffering from COVID-19 because the governments in various states have been getting in the way. So time after time after time, we look at the history of the government, and not only is government unable to address a crisis when it comes about, it often brings about the crisis or sets a framework down, lays some groundwork for a more difficult situation than otherwise would have been. And oftentimes government policies get in the way, impedes opportunity, impedes progress, impedes prosperity through the regulatory state. We're going to be talking a lot today about prescription drugs and unleashing their potential from the FDA and its very stringent regulations and regulatory regime. That is an instance where people's lives have been lost because the government has not allowed a faster process to get potentially life-saving drugs out into the market, or at least making them available to consumers. Time after time after time, government gets in the way of businesses being able to provide more jobs for people, because they up the cost through regulation, making it more difficult, for example, for patients to be treated via telemedicine. It's not this crisis that should be telling us we need to do telemedicine and expand those opportunities and cut the red tape wherever it is, or allow for physicians to be able to practice across state lines. That's not something we should just be waiting for a crisis for. Those are things that should have been done years ago. In fact, those impediments should have been put in place. All too often, as Ronald Reagan cautioned us in his 1981 inaugural address, government is not the solution to our problems.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. Wise words from Ronald Reagan, who was always chock full of wisdom about the role of government and the way in which government gets in the way of our lives. of our opportunities, of our success and our prosperity. We must not look at this crisis and say, hey, this means government needs to step up and do more. What can we do to get government to do more? We need to look at this crisis and say, we can't rely on government. Government doesn't know what it's doing. It's incapable of handling these things. The private market is much more efficient at addressing situations. It's not perfect. Companies aren't perfect. Individuals aren't perfect. The market system isn't perfect. But it's much better than command and control. We've tried it for years and years and years in this country with great success. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, today we're going to be focusing on one aspect of this discussion, which is the idea of patient-doctor freedom, especially when it comes to prescription drugs, and the role of government in getting in the way of that doctor-patient relationship, of impeding progress when it comes to medical advancement that could save lives. The history of the U.S. government is one where, for the most part, we cannot rely upon the government to do so many of the things that people might think or want government to do. And it really is something that the founding fathers of this country provided tremendous, they warned us of the limits of government. For example, if you go to Thomas Jefferson, he once said, every government degenerates when trusted to the rules of the people alone, to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves are its only safe depositories. Again, let me read it. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves are its only safe depositories. In other words, what Thomas Jefferson is saying here is that we cannot be looking simply to the government to provide for the people. We cannot trust the rulers to guide us, to make decisions. We can only trust in the people to do that, because government isn't actually taking into account our own individual self-interests. If you've got an illness, and there is no cure for that illness, but there are treatments that are being tested, and the FDA doesn't want you to try that treatment, you could lose your life when potentially there's a life-saving drug out there because the Food and Drug Administration says, no, we're not good with that drug. We're not going to let you do it. Thankfully, now there's a right to try. We'll talk about that more later on in the program. The bottom line is that you cannot simply trust rulers who are disconnected from you, politicians who are disconnected from you, the people in Washington, D.C., to provide for you or to care about you and your interests. You're going to look out for yourself and your family much more than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Let's go to John Adams talking about power. This is tremendous wisdom from another founding father. Power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak, and that it is doing God's service when it is violating all his laws. Listen to that first part. Power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak. Vast views. Wisdom, he's saying, that bureaucrats, that politicians, that elites think they have that you do not, as the people. That is the hubris of power he is describing. And then one more John Adams quote I want to share. Let's put this one up on the screen. John Adams, second president of the United States, saying, liberty, according to my metaphysics, is a self-determining power in an intellectual agent. It implies thought and choice and power. Liberty meaning that power is in the people. It means that you should be able to think and be free to choose. That comes in all facets of life, and most definitely when it comes to medicine. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Dennis Deruelle, who's a practicing hospitalist. We had him on a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned a drug called Remdesivir. And that is a medication that now is even Dr. Fauci saying, hey, this looks like it's got promise. Dr. Deruelle will join us to talk about that and talk about his perspective on government getting into the doctor-patient relationship and what kind of role government should have when it comes to prescription drugs and regulation thereof. Then a few weeks ago, we caught up with Dr. Jeffrey Singer of the Cato Institute, MD, and had a great discussion about FDA and government roles in prescription drug authorizations. And I want to replay that because it's so fitting with the theme of the doctor-patient relationship, doctor-patient freedom we're talking about today. I want to play that, replay the interview with Dr. Singer. And then, coming up, I want to chat with Dr. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman from New York State. She's going to join us to give her perspective on all of these topics. Some other angles, including emphasizing the right to try peace. We're going to take a break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and when we return, we'll hear some wisdom of Milton Friedman. We will talk with Dr. Dennis Deruelle, and so much more. We're just getting started. It is Free to Choose Friday, and we must remember that as human beings, we ought to be, and this goes to John Adams' second quote we showed, free to think, free to act, and free to choose. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss out.
Census Bureau, I need to take your census.
Hi.
All right, let's get started. Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, this is me.
When is your birthday?
September 15th.
What year?
Every year.
Race?
Republican.
Is this a house, an apartment, or mobile home?
Mobile apartment.
How many people are living in your home?
2.
How many people are not living in your home?
Approximately 7.8 billion other people. Minus 2.
Please identify all that apply. Samoan, Geneva, Milano, Brussels, Neapolitan, Danish.
Thin mint.
And finally, would you like to be a donor?
Oh, sure. Tonsils, toenails, and elbows.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages, while Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next. I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy. Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
Wait.
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomberger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year.
Folks, let's welcome back to the set your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back. Happy Free to Choose Friday as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, second Free to Choose Friday to date. Looking forward to continuing this series. Got some exciting stuff coming up in the future weeks where we hit on a Friday. Good to be with you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you as always. Thanks for joining us. By the way, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, place to go for that. You can also like us on Facebook, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality. Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. And at both of those locations, you'll be able to get access to all of our great content. Dozens upon dozens of videos already of Jimmy at the Crossroads at both locations. So good to be with you. It is Friday. It is Free to Choose Friday, in part to honor the late, great Milton Friedman, but also his discussions about freedom, about choice, about opportunity. And that most definitely includes the doctor-patient relationship and doctor-patient freedom. There are a variety of different aspects we'll get into, although I want to focus particularly on prescription drugs here on this show and also talk about new medication that actually we had first heard about a couple weeks ago here on this show from our first guest, but Dr. Anthony Fauci is now talking about it. Dr. Dennis Deruelle completed a fellowship in Hospitalist Medicine Leadership at the University of California at San Francisco. Dr. Deruelle, chief resident, and did his internal medicine training at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill after earning his MD from Albany Medical College. An accomplished musician as well, Dr. Deruelle has performed at the National AIDS Conference, among other venues. He's a medical doctor and joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Dr. Deruelle, welcome to the show. I'm sorry, can you go ahead? Was that on? Were you able to hear? I couldn't hear you for a second. You there?
Good to be here.
Sorry about that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. That was, one thing hadn't been switched yet, so I got confused for a second. Welcome back. It's good to have you.
Hey, it's great to be here. How
Let me
are
ask
you, Jimmy?
I'm doing pretty well. So what kind of a musician are you? I'm a harmonica player myself.
I'm a guitar player and keyboard player and a songwriter, and I live here in Nashville, and I perform in songwriter rounds, and I've had a song that was played on the radio that I wrote about HIV. That's the song that you mentioned.
Wow, that's incredible. So is it more of a country style? What do you play? What kind of music?
I'm kind of indie, kind of rock, classic
Sure.
rock, but
Okay.
I do write some country music as well.
Love it. Well, I'm a big blues guy, as you might imagine, with the harmonica, so always appreciate another musician coming on the program. So before we get into some of the key topics I really want to dive into, I'm just curious your assessment at this point, Dr. Deruelle, as we start to look at different folks across the country or different states reopening their economies. Where you see things as being at when it comes to the coronavirus crisis right now?
Well, I think that we talked about last week, or the reproductive number, the R naught. We want that to be less than 1. We have now almost every state in the United States is less than 1. We've got about 5, 6 states that are not. And so I think it's a right time to start addressing reopening. I think we need to do it in a graded fashion. I like the gates that we talked about last time. And I think that we are getting more testing. We need more than we have, but we're getting more. And once we identify an outbreak, we're going to be able to test, to trace and isolate quickly, and that's going to be the key. I also feel like by the time the fall comes, we're going to be further along in treatments, which I'd like to talk about. We have some vaccines that are very accelerated. And, I read something in the New York Times that said we'd have one by 2036. So, I think there's been some absurd things out there. I think we'll have a vaccine in the fall for some people, maybe not everybody. And so I think it's time to get moving, but let's still be cautious.
Dr. Deruelle, when it comes to moving forward and reopening, obviously, as you noted, medications and testing are critical components of this. Where do you think we are at right now when it comes to testing, and especially the antibody testing component, which can tell, supposedly, if you've had the virus in the past, as opposed to if you currently do?
Well, I mean, right now, we now know New York City, 21% was positive. I think they tested firemen and EMTs, it was 17%. Miami now at 6%. And we already mentioned the data last time in Boston in the homeless population. And so we know this has been around for a lot longer. In fact, I talked to a pulmonologist here in Nashville that treated a patient that looked identical, I mean, on the ventilator and everything in a clinical way, even their CAT scan, to a COVID patient in January, late January. And that patient was tested for the regular coronavirus, not the COVID one, just a regular coronavirus, and was positive. And so we're now going to go back and do antibodies on that patient to see if they actually did have COVID. We didn't have the COVID-specific test yet. So you're right, antibodies are the way to go. It's been around longer than we know. And that's going to get us on our way to herd immunity, maybe 55% of the population, depending on the true or not of what we need. And so I think the antibody tests are going to be very valuable. However, be aware that the FDA accelerated these tests. So, some of them are not that great. And it's really important if you have a home kit to be careful with the results, because some of the home tests are not that accurate.
In other words, you can get false negatives.
Absolutely, yeah. False negatives and false positives, but either way, there was a really nice review that was done out of San Francisco at UCSF and Boston researchers, where they looked at 14 available tests and the specificity, and the BioSure one was the best one on that list. But you can check out that list. It's been that's a good way to look at the tests.
Dr. Dennis Deruelle, hospitalist, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So a couple weeks ago when we had you on the program, you mentioned Remdesivir as a potential treatment that showed real promise. Well, I want to play a clip here. We've got Dr. Anthony Fauci just a couple of days ago making a strong statement that, hey, this shows real promise a couple weeks after we talked to you about it. Take a listen.
The data shows that Remdesivir has a clear-cut, significant positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery. This is really quite important for a number of reasons, and I'll give you the data. It's highly significant. If you look at the time to recovery being shorter in the Remdesivir arm, it was 11 days compared to 15 days. And that's a p-value for the scientists who are listening of 0.001. So that's something that, although a 31% improvement doesn't seem like a knockout 100%, it is a very important proof of concept, because what it is proven is that a drug can block this virus. And I'll give you an example in a moment of why we think, looking forward, this is very optimistic.
So that's a piece of Dr. Fauci saying, hey, we're pretty encouraged by this. As soon as it's funny, I saw him say that, saw a clip, and I was like, I got to get Dr. Deruelle back on the show. So tell us a little bit about this, this drug that shows some real promise.
Well, thanks a lot. This has been my front runner drug the whole time. I said it before. I've been saying it since the beginning. The reason is it's an antiviral drug. So think about hydroxychloroquine. That's not a typical antiviral. So my training, my background of doing some ID training, I felt it was the top runner. So here's the data. Number one, you get better instead of in 15 days, you get better and recover and out of the hospital in 11 days. mortality was decreased from 11.6% to 8%. Now, that wasn't statistically significant, but it was so very close. And the authors of this study believe that when all the data is done, so in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to actually see that the mortality drop was significant. And so I think that's we now have our first randomized placebo-controlled trial that shows that we have a drug that can work against this virus. The other really important thing that came out was that we can now treat Remdesivir for 5 days. It's equal to 10 days. That was the simple trial done with 397 patients. And that's really important because now, imagine how precious the vials of this drug are. We can now double the amount of people we can treat if we only need to treat for 5 days instead of 10. That trial also showed earlier treatment better than later treatment, so you want to be treated within 10 days of symptoms. And a lot of people say, well, a reduction from 11.6% to 8 isn't that significant. Well, we look at something called the number needed to treat. And the number needed to treat means how many people do we need to treat to basically have an improvement or have an effect. And the number needed to treat for Remdesivir is only 28. Statins, which we treat for patients that have heart attacks, that's actually 200. And so it's not a bad number. We like to see that under 15. But all in all, I'm very pleased. This is my front runner. We will end up using this with other drugs, though. And so this isn't the end.
Now, in terms of Remdesivir, I mean, Dr. Fauci said the reason why he wanted to bring it up was because as a doctor, he has an obligation to let people know about a potential treatment like this. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you could see Remdesivir being more widely used, how it might unfold over time?
Yeah, so, a lot of times we would wait on something until we have all the data, until it's peer reviewed. But we're in an unprecedented time. And so Dr. Fauci wants to, we don't want to use placebo necessarily now on patients when we have an effect. And so what Dr. Fauci was astutely saying is this is going to be the standard by which we measure every other treatment. That's so important. He didn't want to withhold that information. How will it be? We need to get more vials of this. We need to produce many, many more. I think right now we're producing something like 40,000 in a month, and we need to ramp up to get up to 1 million vials of this. They have 1.5 million vials that they already allocated for other usage. And so for me, I think it's just ramping up production. From what I've heard, they're going to partner with other companies so they can accelerate the production of this drug. But I think it's going to be very important to be used. It's going to be used early. And I think it will have an effect. And if you think about Tamiflu only reduces symptoms in patients about a day and a half at most. So here we had a 4-day improvement in recovery. So I think we'll see a lot more of it. The key is we've got to get a lot of it made.
Looking back at how this crisis unfolded once the pandemic started to spread in the United States, Dr. Dennis Deruelle, you can see that there was only one test for this virus that was allowed, created by the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, and distributed by them. Private labs were not able to administer their own tests, for example, and even the CDC test was, it seems, largely ineffective, defective rather, and inefficient. So a lot of issues in the beginning where then the private market wasn't able to step up to the plate, even though there were other tests, other things that other countries were already working towards. In the United States, we were much more restricted in that regard. Now, of course, we're seeing more tests crop up where people are able to access tests from different developers. As you said, the process for antibody testing, for example, speeding up where there are other tests that are out there. Some may be working great, others may not be working quite as well, but that's at least giving it an opportunity more for people to do those tests and so forth, as opposed to waiting for the FDA's otherwise long process to get that sort of approval. I'm wondering your thoughts on what this crisis can teach us about the current medication processes at the FDA as far as approvals for tests, approvals for prescription drugs, and so forth, because it seems to me that it's oftentimes excessive and convoluted and disrupts doctor-patient freedom. What's your big picture sense?
Yes, I agree. And just for full disclosure, I do consulting with a company named Cepheid. They actually interviewed me on February 11th. They called and they were interviewing all their experts, and they said, should we develop a test for COVID-19? It had just been identified. They already have a lab test for other viruses, for mainly influenza. And I said, absolutely, do it. And they have done it, and they're contributing just like other companies are now to these rapid tests. So what is my bias? It is to let the free market and let innovation rule. I think the FDA probably has in the past been a little too slow with this innovation, and I would rather a little bit less regulation but still have very strict criteria, because we need to get as many options out there. And I think the private market is the way to do it. That's the way we've always done it. And I'd like to see coming out of this a little bit more of an accelerated pathway for both these tests and more medications.
Most certainly. Well, I will have to say that this idea of the FDA working too slowly is nothing new. In fact, in 1978, Milton Friedman, who of course had a series Free to Choose in 1980, he gave a speech, and after that speech he was asked questions by a variety of people. I think this was at an American Medical Association event or something. And in cut 4, this is a little bit about Dr. Friedman talking about the FDA and his overall views on that.
What are your views on the regulatory powers of the FDA and the work that they're trying to do?
Well, you have a great many heart specialists in this room, I think, or some. I think if you ask them, they will tell you that there are some excellent beta blockers which are available in Great Britain, in Canada, and in the rest of the world, which cannot be sold in this country because of FDA regulation. I have seen estimates from reputable physicians that the availability of those beta blockers would save roughly 10,000 lives a year. I believe the FDA, as it has been operating, has done vastly more harm than good. I have no doubt that it has prevented some bad drugs from coming on the market. But in compensation for this, it has also prevented some very good drugs from coming on the market. It has made the cost of discovering and developing new drugs, it has increased it enormously. It has driven medical research out of this country and into other countries. So I think the FDA has been an unmitigated disaster over the past 20 years.
Milton Friedman never one to mince words. That was 42 years ago, Dr. Dennis Deruelle, physician and hospitalist. What do you make of it?
That's amazing, because we use beta blockers now in heart failure, and we've shown that it does reduce death. And boy, how prescient was he in saying that? You know, and I think there's a couple of points. You know, after thalidomide, which we all know caused birth defects, the FDA famously missed that one, and after that, they were never going to miss again, and so they have a preponderance of caution with new drugs, and I understand that. But I know, and I'm not going to name the drug, but I was involved with a company that made a drug that is basically like an IV Motrin, and patients could avoid opiates, so we could avoid the opioid and narcotic treatment. And that drug was about ready to be approved, and it wasn't approved, and now guess what? A year and a half, almost 2 years later, it's now approved, and the same thing applies there. So I understand the rigor and the need for rigor, but we cannot slow innovation because patients depend on it.
You know, I'm curious your thoughts as a practicing physician, as a hospitalist, as someone who's dealing with many patients and supervising other medical providers who are dealing with patients and providing care. What's the thought process that goes through your mind when you're looking at a drug and its promise and its potential and making a determination, hey, this is right for this patient, that can help underscore the point why doctor-patient freedom is critical?
Well, first of all, I'm a physician, so do no harm. I'm not going to give a drug that I think or authorize a procedure that I think could hurt someone. Then I'm going to look at the effect in a study, and I talk about this in my book. Just because we have a study with benefit, I have to make sure that you're one of the kind of patients that were done in this study. So will you see the benefit that these patients in the study got? Because you might be in a different population. And so once I understand the side effects, and once I know the effect that this patient could have, then I always talk about the risk-benefit ratio with every patient. I tell them what their potential benefit is and what their risk is, and then we make a decision together. It's called shared decision-making. And that's the way to do it. And if in my book, I worked with the NFL on the book, and I really liken it to a quarterback coming over to the sideline with a coach at the 2-minute warning, thinking together, putting their heads together, and then finally the ultimate decision is that patient, that quarterback going back in. They've heard what my advice is, but we've talked together, but it's a shared decision. But in the end, the patient has the final decision.
Dr. Dennis Deruelle, again, our guest. You mentioned his book. It's entitled Your Healthcare Playbook, Winning the Game of Modern Medicine. Just a couple minutes with you, Dr. Deruelle. And one of the things that I just want to underscore is that when we're talking about healthcare and providing good quality care to patients, that's something that the doctor really is going to take into account much more than the federal government will. And that's the thing for me. When we're talking about a physician like yourself who is in Nashville versus Washington, D.C. bureaucrats at, say, the FDA or some of the other federal organizations, they're not going to care about your patients' lives in the way that you will, which is why I think that we need to re-emphasize, and I think this crisis reminds us of the importance, the centrality of the doctor-patient relationship and having the freedom to treat patients as is necessary, especially for their own circumstances. Every individual circumstance is going to be at least somewhat different, but also you're going to care about that individual more than bureaucrats will.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you think about it, we can't wait always for all the studies to be done. There are a lot of people that were treated with Remdesivir. It's not even approved by the FDA. So we need to make decisions with the best data that we have, and we're going to base it on every individual patient, and that's the way it should be. I'm all for making sure they're safe, and I think that's the role of the FDA. But at the end of the day, I'm going to make the best decision shared with my patient with the best knowledge that I have, and that's a freedom that I hope we never take away.
And Dr. Deruelle, let's also talk about, I remember last time there was a lot of discussion about hydroxychloroquine, and you said that you were giving that to every patient, if I recall correctly, because it's demonstrated that it might be helping some people, so you might as well give it to those who fit a profile where they're not particularly acute to the risks that might be involved with getting that drug. Obviously, that's a similar thing to what Dr. Fauci was saying for Remdesivir and his reasoning for bringing about a discussion about that medication. Tell us a little bit more about how you make that kind of a determination, and again, a determination that really, as you pointed out about Remdesivir not being approved for this kind of use, that only a physician can really make.
That's right. Well, my feeling I'm not super bullish on hydroxychloroquine.
Right.
Again, it wasn't designed for killing this specific microbe. However, my feeling and what I'm advising our doctors today is do not use it with azithromycin. The combination really increases the chance of having a heart complication or a prolonged QT and an arrhythmia. So I've already, and the NIH came out and said the same thing, I've already told our doctors don't use it in combination. However, using it alone without azithromycin, I don't have enough data to say it does or does not work. So if the risk-benefit ratio favors using it, then I'm advising to use it. Now, I'm not using in high dose. I think that's the really important point. There have been some studies that looked at 600 milligrams twice a day, and they showed that they had an increased risk of heart complications and other complications. So I'm recommending lower doses, and until I know better, I'm not saying don't use it. My gut is it's not going to show as much of a benefit, but we don't have the data yet.
Dr. Deruelle, final question. Today is Free to Choose Friday. Obviously, we're focusing in on the doctor-patient relationship and doctor-patient freedom. When this crisis is all said and done, what do you hope is the lesson we learned from it vis-a-vis the doctor-patient freedom issue?
Well, the lesson that I hope that we take from this is that there's nothing more important than having a good primary care doctor, having a known relationship with that doctor, and trusting that doctor and getting that doctor involved early and getting their advice about all of this news and all the information. I hope that we now use telemedicine much more. I hope we use technology and virtual visits much, much more. I hope we remember to wash our hands, which, by the way, we have not been very good. Studies in healthcare show doctors, nurses, we're not that great about it. And therefore, I hope we take that away. And I hope at the end of the day that we now strengthen that relationship between patient and doctor, and everybody gets a good primary care doctor.
Well put, sir, and get the government more out of the way. Dr. Dennis Deruelle, physician, practicing hospitalist, author of the book, Your Healthcare Playbook, Winning the Game of Modern Medicine, and a musician. I want to hear that song. Please send that along to me. I appreciate you joining us here today and look forward to having you back in the future.
Will do. Thanks a lot. Be safe, Jimmy.
Thank you. You as well, Dr. Dennis Deruelle. Our guest here, kicking things off on this Free to Choose Friday. Always fascinating insights. He did a couple weeks ago, well before Fauci made an announcement, apparently well before he even came on this show, was talking about Remdesivir and its promise, and it really does seem to hold some promise. We need to keep in mind the importance of the doctor-patient relationship and getting the government out of the way, not increasing its involvement. When we come back, also a couple of weeks ago, I caught up with Dr. Jeffrey Singer, who is a Cato Institute fellow, senior fellow, and also is a medical doctor himself. And we had a great conversation about the role of the Food and Drug Administration. And I want to replay that interview because it's so fitting on this Free to Choose Friday. And then we'll be joined via the phone by Nan Hayworth, who is a former Congresswoman and herself a former medical doctor. And looking forward to talking with Dr. Nan Hayworth coming up here in just a little bit. We got a lot happening here on a Free to Choose Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Stay tuned.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, if I wanted to go around town, take this harmonica, and become a musician, I don't need a license to do that. But if I wanted to be a barber or a cosmetologist, it'll take me thousands of hours of training and experience in order to get permission from the government to do just that. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Let's talk about occupational licensing. Did you know that 1/3 of all Americans need government permission just to do their jobs? And that according to the Mercatus Center, many of these workers earn less than the average income. How can you improve your station in life, have upward mobility, and prosper on your own terms if you're constrained by the government like this? It's called occupational licensing, and it's the requirement that many jobs need you to meet in order to do that job. That is, for example, training and experience that's required for you to get the okay from government to start working.
Plumbers license plumbers. And if you really want to know the real function of licensure, of licensing all these occupations, all you have to do is go and see who goes down to the state legislature to lobby in favor of licensing. Now, if the real true function of licensing is to protect consumers, you'd expect consumers to be lobbying for licensure.
Now, this is something that hurts a lot of people. It's actually not helping people on the whole, according to a number of studies. For example, an Obama administration study found that most research does not find that licensing improves quality or public health and safety. In fact, here in Colorado, where I live, barbers require 10 times the amount of training and experience as emergency medical technicians in order to start working. When it comes to cosmetologists, they need 12 times as much training and experience as EMTs. People who are saving lives need far less training and experience to start working than barbers do. We need to start scaling back occupational licensing because this will help to unleash the unlimited potential of each and every individual. And that's what we should be focusing on. Industry boards that approve licensing requirements in many cases oftentimes promote it because they want to constrain new entries into the fields. They got it wrong. We need more competition and more opportunity across the board for better quality and also to improve people's lives. And in the end, isn't that what good public policy is all about?
Ladies and gentlemen, your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege as always. Coming up in just a bit, Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman and MD, will be joining us, chat about our topic of the day here on Free to Choose Friday, which is the doctor-patient relationship and doctor-patient freedom. A couple weeks ago, we caught up with Dr. Jeffrey Singer, MD, from the Cato Institute, and had what I thought was a great conversation about the Food and Drug Administration, its role, and states' roles in approving medications, especially during this crisis. I wanted to share that because it fit perfectly with the theme. We're going to replay my interview with Dr. Jeffrey Singer here in a moment. Enjoy. I want to go back, take you back to the 1970s. There was a great show called Free to Choose, hosted by the great late economist, free market economist, Milton Friedman. I want to play a clip from one of those episodes, which has resonated with me for quite some time now, in terms of individual liberty and the doctor-patient connection and privilege when it comes to medical decisions and especially your ability to access prescription drugs. Take a look at this. This is from the 70s, but it still applies today, perhaps even more so.
It's no accident that, despite the best of intentions, the Food and Drug Administration operates so as to discourage the development and prevent the marketing of new and potentially useful drugs. Put yourself in the position of a bureaucrat who works over there. Suppose you approve a drug that turns out to be dangerous, a thalidomide. Your name is going to be on the front page of every newspaper. You will be in deep disgrace. On the other hand, suppose you make the mistake of failing to approve a drug that could have saved thousands of lives. Who will know? The people whose lives might have been saved will not be around. Their relatives are unlikely to know that there was something that could have saved their lives. A few doctors, a few research workers, they will be disgruntled. They will know.
You or I? So that's Milton Friedman back in the 1970s. I've been wanting to talk about this with Dr. Jeffrey Singer, who is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, medical doctor, and author of a great piece just earlier last week entitled, "Doctors, Not Politicians, Ought to Decide Whether Off-Label Drug Use of Hydroxychloroquine is Appropriate for COVID-19 Patients." Dr. Singer joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Doctor, welcome to the program. Such a pleasure to have you here today.
Pleasure to be here, Jimmy.
Thank you for joining us. So this is the reason why I wanted to highlight this, because of the hydroxychloroquine question. You hit the nail on the head in your piece, and I'm right there with you. I've been prescribed medications in the past, off book, that is to say a use that is different from what the original intention or proved intention is for, and I think that right should continue, whether it's hydroxychloroquine or other drugs, between the doctor and patient. Let's start there before we get to the question of the role of the FDA.
Sure. A lot of people probably are unaware of the concept or term off-label. But essentially, when a drug maker applies to the FDA for what's called a new drug approval, in the application, they have to state what they intend the drug to be used for. Once it goes through the lengthy process to get approved, and that could, on average, is about 12 years, the FDA allows it to put on the label the approved use. However, there's nothing that the FDA has no problems with clinicians using it for uses other than the approved use on the label. They defer to the judgment of clinicians, of course, who know their patients and in consultation with their patients, based upon what physicians are learning out there in the real world. Because every day, if you're a physician, you pick up a medical journal or go to a medical conference, almost everything that's being discussed is the efficacy of a particular drug to treat a particular problem. And we're always reading about or hearing presented to us reports about uses that a drug has for something other than its original intention. There are countless drugs like that. In fact, many people may know the famous blue pill. Viagra was not intended to treat ED originally. So doctors learn about these things, and then when they have a patient that has a problem who is not responding to the standard treatments, aware of this, they tell their patient, there have been a number of reports from credible sources that that drug, XYZ actually might help your situation. Would you like to give it a try? There's risks involved. I know about the risks as well, and you're supposed to tell the patient that. And then if the patient agrees, we do this. We do this all the time. In fact, according to the government's own data, about 20% of prescriptions written in the United States are written in this way. It's called off-label. And the reason it's called off-label is because the label doesn't say it's approved for use in that. So when you hear about, several reports from around the world that the drug hydroxychloroquine, which has been around for about 50 years, the brand name is Plaquenil. It's used to treat rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and several other connective tissue diseases, and it also can be used to treat malaria. Chloroquine is related to, and that's also used to treat malaria. So it's been around long enough that we know its risk profile. We know what to avoid, what drugs it interacts with, what the usual safe doses are. And then there have been numerous reports that using either of those drugs has been helpful, if not curative, in treating COVID-19 infections. Now, I as a science-oriented person, I'm not willing to jump on board with that. I'm willing to say that's very fascinating, encouraging. I hope you're right. I'd like to see more data. I also, as a practitioner, I realize that, we practitioners are we're coming from a different place than the regulators and the researchers who do the approval process. So we're dealing with life and death decisions in the trenches. So when I have a patient,
we're talking with Dr. Jeffrey Singer of the Cato Institute, Senior Fellow, cutting in and out just a little bit here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Dr. Singer, you cut out very briefly.
Yeah.
Can you please restate the last 30 seconds? Yeah, you're better now. Thank you.
If I have a patient who's not doing well and I'm afraid I'm going to lose the patient, and I'm aware that there are numerous studies mainly anecdotal reports and some small studies that suggest this may be a lifesaver for that patient. I'm ethically obligated, actually, to mention to my patient, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I need to make you aware of this, and I'm willing to give it to you if you're willing to let me give it to you. And so I would do that myself. In fact, I would ask for it for me if I was in that situation based upon what I know, even though I cannot in good conscience say that I know it's going to work or not. Yeah. And that's called off-label use. Yeah. Now, like I say, the FDA has no problems with this. And unfortunately, this has become, when it comes to off-label use of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine for the treatment of COVID-19, it's become political. And it's probably become political, unfortunately, because the president associated himself with it. And then it's kind of taken a red team, blue team kind of thing.
And Dr. Singer, I want to jump in right on that particular point because we have the FDA with such an expansive role, that leads to the potential for a politicization of these kinds of drugs, where you have politicians making a claim in one direction and then others in the media or politicians may say, oh, well, that guy likes it or is supporting it, therefore maybe we should be speaking out against this drug and we should be calling on the FDA to ban it, or governors or what have you, for this type of purpose. And it gets to the fundamental question that I wanted to talk with you about. And that is the role of the FDA and the government in making decisions on whether or not to allow a drug to market. And this one in particular, hydroxychloroquine that people are talking about, as you know, has been around for about 50 years, prescribed for other purposes. We know the safety profile for it, how safe it may be for certain people, and what have you. That is information that doctors can and should be able to use to make their own decisions on whether or not to prescribe it to a patient. Doctor-patient privilege, being able to communicate, make decisions between the two of you as opposed to having the government get involved. And it goes to the question of efficacy versus safety. It seems that people are saying the government should get in the way because we don't know that this actually is effective at treating coronavirus or COVID-19. Even though we know that it's safe. And my view is the FDA at most should be involved in safety for drugs as opposed to efficacy.
Well, first of all, I agree with you on the last point you made, but it's also important to point out the FDA is not prohibiting doctors from prescribing this.
Absolutely.
Politicians are. We're seeing governors in numerous states pass executive orders saying you cannot use hydroxychloroquine to treat this and this disorder, which is an intrusion. First of all, it's a violation of the patient's right to medicate themselves to save their lives. It's also an intrusion on the practice of medicine. All of a sudden, politicians are inserting themselves into this. The FDA, to be fair to them, they're not prohibiting it all. They just haven't put it on their label that it's approved for that use because they don't feel ready to do that, which is fine. Now, getting to your other point, I agree completely. When the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed initially in 1938, the mission was just to make sure that all drugs that came out were considered safe to give to the public. In fact, it was actually stated, if you look at the congressional record, the authors of the act said there's nothing in this act is intended to infringe upon the fundamental right of people to self-medicate. The intention of this act is just to make self-medication safer. So it was, I personally think that not allowing it because it's not thought to be safe in itself is an infringement on the right to self-medicate. But aside from that, it was at least showing respect for the right to self-medicate, and it was only concerning itself with safety. Then in 1962, after the famous thalidomide scare, which you mentioned in your setup piece, where a drug not approved by the FDA yet, but approved in Europe and in use experimentally here in this country, thalidomide, which was designed to treat pregnancy, nausea in pregnancy, was found to cause these horrific birth defects. So in reaction to that, Congress added the Kefauver-Harris amendments, which to me, I'm still trying to understand why what they added makes any sense, because the FDA already hadn't yet approved it as being safe. And so now they added the efficacy requirement, which adds years to the approval process. So now once the drug is shown to be safe and the safe dosage range has been established through trials supervised by or overseen by the FDA, it next has to go through multiple years of trials to see how well it works. And the irony of that, not only does this deny a lot of people access to drugs that may be available to them in other countries already, and as Professor Friedman pointed out, how many people we don't see who died waiting for the drug to be available, but the irony of it is, according to the FDA, so let's say it's being evaluated to see if it has efficacy to treat condition A. And if it does, then it's finally approved to treat condition A. FDA's position is once it's approved to treat condition A, we don't care whether doctors use it to treat conditions B through Z. We defer to their judgment, their analysis of the clinical literature and the research, and their knowledge of their patients. So the first question one asks is, well, wait a second. So if you trust my judgment on conditions B through Z, why did I have to wait on condition A? Why didn't you trust my judgment on A through Z? Why did my patients have to wait years before they can use this drug if now you're telling me you trust me to use my judgment? So I would have, and of course, that kind of attitude gave birth to the right to try movement,
yes,
which resulted in the federal right to try legislation 2 years ago. But even then, in order to be able to, under right to try legislation, if it's proven to be safe, then you can have access to it, but only you have to be a terminally ill patient who's tried every other possible avenue, and you therefore have you can prove to everyone that you have nothing to lose. I don't think it should be restricted to that situation. I think we have a right.
And this gets to a very important point, which I think is fundamental and often discarded by Americans today, which is unfortunate. It's been the case for decades. I mean, things that you're saying were in the Friedman clip we played from the 1970s. I mean, we're like 40 years later or so, and it is crazy how much it's even gotten worse as opposed to better. But and again, we're talking with Dr. Jeffrey Singer, medical doctor and senior fellow at the Cato Institute. The doctor-patient relationship is sacrosanct, or so we hear. But when government wants to get involved because they think they know best whether or not to allow something to go onto the market, whether that is the FDA or it is governors who are using partisan politics to make medical intervention decisions, that means that the doctor and the patient are losing the ability to make their own decisions, or that we have lost the ability to make decisions. And that is a fundamental travesty for liberty, I think.
Yes, and not only, I excuse the FDA on the hydroxychloroquine one, but they're guilty, of course, of being subject to political pressure. Perfect example. For more than 20 years, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, as well as the American Academy of Family Practice, has been saying birth control pills should be available over the counter. Surveys show the majority of practicing physicians feel that way. Birth control pills are available over the counter in roughly 102 countries. Yet the FDA has not approved them for over-the-counter use. When it came to Plan B, which is the morning after pill, it took 14 years for that to be made available over the counter, even though on numerous occasions, the FDA's own advisory boards overwhelmingly recommended it be made available over the counter. And that was because there was resistance from groups of people who felt that it would encourage sexual promiscuity and the like. So the FDA itself is subject to lots of political pressure. And now we have the ironic thing where, Plan B is available over the counter, but Plan A isn't. Can't understand that one. And the doctors themselves are saying, you shouldn't have to come to me to get a prescription for birth control pills because I don't think that's necessary. I think you could safely take them yourself. But there's another example. We're basically having political decisions control decisions that should be made individually by the patient in consultation with, obviously, with any rational person is going to want to seek advice from an expert before they put something into their body that can potentially harm them.
Again, we're talking with medical doctor Jeffrey Singer, who is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. I want to ask you, before we let you go, doctor, about your thoughts on how the coronavirus pandemic is being handled from the government. I mean, a couple of days ago, we had the controversy over President Trump having said the president has total authority, but the next day he clarified by using language that fits in with the policies that his administration has been putting forward, which is the idea of national guidance from the federal government, but states and localities are able to make their own decisions on shutting down the economy or reopening the economy and those kinds of things, as opposed to having the big national plan. So what do you make of that, and what do you make of how states have been handling this from your medical position?
Well, I first of all, President Trump was obviously mistaken when he thought he had total authority. Our system, if President Trump said tomorrow, okay, the economy is opened, Governor Cuomo of New York could say, well, it's not open here in New York because that's the way our system works. And under the Constitution. But also, the federal government does have an important and legitimate role to play here. It mainly it should play the role of providing useful information, making sure, sort of almost like a quarterback, like making sure that all of the state and local governments have all the information available to them, providing logistic support, things like using the Army Corps of Engineers to build hospitals if necessary, moving material around if you need to move ventilators from one part of the country to another. Things like that are legitimate functions of the federal government, but most decisions really should be made on the local level, even from a public health standpoint, because demographic situations, geographic situations are not the same. One size does not fit all. So, for example, New York City has very unique situations to New York and the New York metropolitan area, where people live much more dense concentration. 50% of New Yorkers in the New York City area use mass transit as opposed to driving in their cars. They go into crowded elevators. And there's a lot more kind of international traffic. So you're dealing with a different situation than, say, in Arizona, where I'm speaking to you from right now, where people tend to be more widely dispersed, travel almost exclusively in cars, keep bigger distances. So and therefore, and that explains, by the way, to a great extent, why we're seeing case reports as well as case fatality rates differ from state to state. You have a state like California, which has 40 million people and has roughly, I think, 800 deaths right now, compared to New York State, which has nearly half of the deaths in the United States and less of a population. Now, people say that California, engaged in social distancing practices before New York did, but only a few days before. So that's not enough to explain it. I think there's a lot to explain. It has to do with differences in age of the population, lifestyles, demographics, et cetera. So really, these things are best managed on the local level, where the local public health authorities know what's going on there better. And it's also easier to quickly change and adjust to situations on the ground as they change, because you're dealing more locally with local knowledge, as opposed to having one best way that has to be imposed on everyone. And the other thing about that is, if there's only one way that's governed by Washington and it's mistaken, think of all the people who suffer. Whereas if a mistaken approach is taken by one smaller jurisdiction, fewer people are harmed by that. And not only that, there's ability for the various jurisdictions to learn from one another.
Well, a final question for you, Dr. Singer, actually, that comes to mind is, what do you make of the declining projections? That is to say, we are still projected to see about 60,000 American deaths from coronavirus by August, which is a tragedy, to be sure. Every life lost from this is a tragedy. But at the same time, it's significantly less than the models were before, as we've actually been getting data that has been plugged into those models and revising them downward. So what do you make of that, real briefly?
Well, that's the problem with models. As Dr. Fauci said, models are only as good as the assumptions you put in them. Yep. So in the beginning, we were putting in assumptions based upon the little information we had, and we still have a lot lot to learn, by the way. We still need to get more testing out there to really know more about just what is the fatality rate? Because right now our fatality rate is based on the number of cases reported, which is based upon people who have symptoms being tested, not even people who aren't symptomatic or being and therefore not being tested. So this is important when you make policy based on models. You need to understand that you're still flying by the seat of your pants because you don't know how accurate the assumptions are that you placed in the model. This should be a lesson for all kind of public policy, not just public health policy. But when we talk about models that have to do with other things, models are as good as the assumptions you put in them. And you got to be very careful that you don't make irreversible decisions based upon models, since they're subject to change.
Dr. Jeffrey Singer, medical doctor and senior fellow at the Cato Institute. So great to have you on this show. I'm sure we'll have you back. Really appreciate the conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Be well and healthy, sir.
You too.
All right. Once again, Dr. Singer from the Cato Institute joining us. And that was such a great conversation from April 16th, fitting into today's Free to Choose Friday theme, focusing in on prescription drugs and doctor-patient freedom. It's fundamental to any vibrant healthcare system, any healthcare system that actually is oriented towards providing the best quality care. Give doctors the freedom to make decisions with their patients and not have all the red tape clogging up the system. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. When we return, we will be talking with Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman, medical doctor herself, and get her thoughts on this system as well as the right to try that Dr. Singer talked a little bit about and so much more. Keep it right here. Free to Choose Friday. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magotol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magotol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magotol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magotol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magotol, from the makers of Triggerol.
Safe, unsafe. Very safe, completely unsafe. Extremely insanely safe. X Games unsafe. Who's there? What do you want?
It's me, Arnold. Don Trump, I need to ask you a favor. I need you to stop using my quotes and my movie titles in your speeches. When you talk to the public, it gives them the wrong idea that somehow I support you.
I can do whatever I want. I am, after all, Commander-in-Chief.
Ah! Yeah, that's what I mean right there. You can't just blatantly rip people off. That is a movie that I was in, not you, me.
I can do as I wish, as I totally recall.
See what I mean? That was a great movie I did with Jamie Lee Curtis and James Cameron, and neither one of those two support you, and now you're using that. You can't keep on doing this.
That's
exactly
media true lie right there.
That's what I mean. You can't say that.
I don't know. Whatever became of us, Arnold? We used to be like brothers, like twins.
That's the last straw. I can't take it anymore. There's something wrong with you. You must have something in your brain.
It's not a tumor.
That's it. That's from Kindergarten Cop. You can't steal that.
You know what? You're fired.
You can't fire me. I don't work for you anymore. I quit.
I want you to get Pence on the line right away, Mike Pence. We're going to send him down to Mar-a-Lago, and we're going to put a stop to this Arnold business. Tell him to run. Go. Get to the chopper.
I heard that. Knock it off now, or I'll be back. Unlike you in 2020, I'll be back.
Get him out.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for the final segment of Free to Choose Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Here's your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic once again as we continue here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. As the man said, it is Free to Choose Friday, our second edition, focusing in on the doctor-patient relationship and doctor-patient freedom. Good to be with you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on the show, Jimmy at the Crossroads, that brings engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, day in and day out. So as we've been talking about the freedom of doctors and patients to make decisions as is best for the patient after that consultation is critical. It's essential, an essential component to a medical system that actually provides top quality care. Nan Hayworth is a former Congresswoman for the 19th Congressional District of New York, a medical doctor herself, and she joins us now to pick up this conversation that I think we need to underscore in the current climate. Nan, welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. It's always great to talk with you.
Great to talk with my most brilliant millennial colleague, Jimmy, and also to follow, indeed, such august guests as former Governor Schwarzenegger and, of course, our president.
I chuckle at all of that. Nan Hayworth, including the brilliant part. I mean, I did tell you to call me millennial genius, so you didn't get exactly the right language, but close enough. I'll throw a 10 your way after the interview. And yeah, do you like that the little entertainment?
Text in the mail. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, indeed. It will be in the mail. It's not there yet, but it'll be a little later. I appreciate it.
That's what they all say, Jimmy.
Did you enjoy the humor there too before we brought you on?
I did.
We like to have fun here. So
absolutely, and you know your point, the ad, of course, that preceded the president and Governor Schwarzenegger. It says much. I mean, you're teaching with humor, but we have seen in all too many ways, including under the auspices of a great president who really seeks to lift barriers, how government intervention can cause unfortunately, lots of collateral problems, unintentionally, but for real.
Oh, make no mistake about it. That is for darn sure. I want to start off here, as I think we should, on Free to Choose Friday, by playing another clip of the great late Milton Friedman. This is from 1999, Dr. Friedman on with Peter Robinson on Uncommon Knowledge, and he got into a discussion about the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, the chief regulatory authority when it comes to approving prescription drugs and the free market. Rather, I should say, the FDA versus the free market. Take a listen to this.
Thalidomide. Thalidomide, marketed in the,
everybody's favorite example.
Well, I may be leading with my chin on this one, but I'm going to lead with it anyway. 50s and 60s, it is marketed in Europe as a drug to help women get through the nausea that they sometimes experience during pregnancy. The Food and Drug Administration said it had been inadequately tested in the United States and forbade it to be marketed in this country, with the result that thousands of children were born with horrible birth defects in Europe to mothers who had used thalidomide, but that didn't happen to American children because the FDA had intervened and kept that drug off the market. Thank God for the FDA, right?
Wrong.
All right, why?
This is a case in which they did save lives. This was a good case. But suppose they are equally slow in adopting a drug, which turns out to be very good and very beneficial. How do you ever see the lives that are lost because of that? You're an FBA official.
Right.
You have a question of whether to approve or disapprove a new drug. If you approve it, and it turns out to be a bad drug like thalidomide, you're in the soup. Your name's going to be on every front
Cost me
page.
my job. I get hauled up to
Right.
Congress to testify. Right.
On the other hand, if you disapprove it, but it turns out to be good, well, then later on you approve it 4 or 5 years later. Nobody is going to complain about the fact that you didn't prove it earlier, except those greedy pharmaceutical companies that want to make profits at the expense of the public, as the saying as everybody will say. And so the result is that the pressure on the FDA is always to be late in approving. And there is enormous evidence that they have caused more deaths by their late approvals than they have saved by their early approvals.
21 years ago, the wisdom of Milton Friedman. Your thoughts, Dr. Nan Hayworth?
What a wonderful segment, Jimmy, and semi-peripherally, it brings to mind that if only children in school were taught Milton Friedman instead of not being, because trying to persuade adults of these eminently sensible principles once they have been indoctrinated makes it all that much harder. But with regard to the FDA and the question at hand, which is, what of the hidden lives lost by delay of life-saving therapies, point well taken. And Jimmy, you've asked the question about a safety standard versus a safety plus efficacy standard.
Right.
And I think you can look at the history of medications that have been approved in this country, and certainly any that have been dramatic life-saving medications that were significantly delayed to market. I don't think that, in fairness, I don't think that there are any necessarily glaring examples of that, because our life-saving armamentarium consists largely of medications that were, whose benefits were readily demonstrable and they were readily approved. These days, in this era, we're a bit more at the margins in terms of the numbers, but nonetheless, every life saved is precious. So I would gladly, and I have experience in the pharma industry, working with the pharma industry, I would gladly substitute in a safety standard. And certainly efficacy is a valuable principle, but and highly valuable, obviously. It's very important because there are also risks to taking medications. Clearly, that's part of the safety issue, but often you don't know the entire safety picture. In fact, you never do until a medication or an intervention, biologic or device, gets into broad use in the population. But today, because we have the opportunity to finally target interventions at very small, select groups within the population, we tailor medicine, personalized precision medicine. It becomes all the more important for clinicians to have that full armamentarium, and there have certainly been some very poignant arguments, especially conspicuously concerning muscular dystrophy, there was a huge fight about a genetic intervention that was tested, and it didn't satisfy the FDA as to numbers, but it certainly seemed as though at least one subset of the muscular dystrophy population could benefit significantly from this intervention. Small numbers, but a profound impact. So I would agree that a safety consideration should be first and foremost, and let the marketplace do much more in terms of efficacy.
Well, and Nan, one thing that comes to my mind is Milton Friedman also made the point that we don't know what drugs were not approved that might have saved lives over the decades. Earlier, I played a clip from 1978, Friedman having these very same warnings. And as Dr. Deruelle pointed out, beta blockers have been used for heart conditions and whatnot since then. And that's something that Friedman was saying. Doctors are saying this could be done, but they haven't been approved by the FDA. And you think, okay, how many drugs were denied over the years that could well have actually been able to address some of these issues? And then also, Dr. Singer pointed out from the Cato Institute, he pointed out that if you trust patients or doctors to make decisions for off-label use of a particular drug, why wait until that point when you've tested efficacy for one use, but you're saying, hey, if you could find it effective for another use, then we give the doctor latitude with the patient.
No, the points are entirely taken. Looking at knowing what I know about the practice of medicine and the demographics of disease, I'm quite honestly not able to think of necessarily a glaring example in which we say, my God, we could have saved 15,000 patients with XYZ if it hadn't taken 3 years to get this to market. Usually, something that is, if there is a tremendous need and there's a promising therapy, even old, hidebound FDA has typically, over the years, I think for the most part, we've been able to get things out to market reasonably well. But that doesn't mean that we can't do a lot better. It does, and the FDA certainly. As I say, in this era in which we're going to have smaller numbers of patients who can benefit dramatically from certain interventions, we do need to rethink the way they do things. And in fact, Scott Gottlieb, when he was the FDA administrator, did think differently and did institute reforms to emphasize more in the way of real-world evidence, to speed and streamline data collection, analysis, and decision-making, and those are things that very much need to be done. Apropos specifically, though, of the off-label use of medications and urgent need, we may indeed right now, with COVID-19, be seeing a situation in which thousands of Americans might be able to benefit from an intervention that has yet to be endorsed by the FDA, and that, of course, is hydroxychloroquine. We don't know yet for sure. We are glad that clinicians have legal access in their formularies to off-label use of hydroxychloroquine. But as we all know, there's been a lot of cross-currents and a lot of frowning by respected experts on the innovative use of by clinicians of hydroxychloroquine early in the course of COVID-19, not once somebody's in the hospital, but early on.
Well,
and that actually is like the ultimate right to try right now.
Well, and similarly, though, you got Remdesivir, which Dr. Deruelle has been a strong advocate of, and now Dr. Fauci said, hey, I want to let people know that this one is holding promise. And by the way, Dr. Deruelle says he's been, for patients that he's not worried about the risk profile, they've been giving hydroxychloroquine automatically, but he's been noticing real success with Remdesivir. The point is that medical providers should be able to have the latitude to make decisions for their patients in consultation with the patients saying, sure, let's go ahead and try this. I've been in situations where I've been dealing with a condition and the doctor says, hey, here's an off-label use for this particular drug. We think it could work. Lo and behold, in my particular circumstance of something, it worked out. But one thing that you often get, if you say, let's go back to the safety standard, let's just focus on the idea of safety or limit the role of the Food and Drug Administration in providing the authorization for a particular drug, Nan Hayworth. This kind of gets to a philosophical question in some respect, but it's the idea of, well, then won't people die if you don't have the government making these particular judgments to screen it out and ensure that there is a protection for particular prescription drugs that people may get? Basically, hey, the government's going to be able to provide better protection than doctors will for their patients. What do you make of that argument, the idea of more dangerous situations if the FDA doesn't have this expansive role?
I think there is, as in all things, there is a balance that we need to seek. We know that, and I have all faith in markets, and indeed little faith in government. I mean, I have absolutely no faith, obviously, in government overreach. But where do we define that line? The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, did arise because there actually was a need to protect the public from adulterated products. There was there was an authority to which we did seek to turn. Now that was that was 100 plus years ago. The public did not have access to information as we do now. So people could exist in a state of profound ignorance. And indeed, you could argue that certainly about a lot of labor laws that were instituted in a very different era when we had far less access, far less transparency, right? The marketplace of information was a very different thing. But when intelligent people have access to information, when intelligent clinicians have access to information, if we trust those in industry to have the best interests of America's patients at heart, and certainly my experience in industry did not contradict that, then certainly we can put more trust in the markets than we might have been able to do 120 years ago.
That's a good point.
And I think that's an argument to be made.
Dr. Nan Hayworth, our guest, ophthalmologist and former Congresswoman for the 19th Congressional District in New York. Going off that point, I mean, not only is there more information for people to access and for doctors to be able to access, but you also have a situation where back in the day, when the FDA went into effect originally, it was to provide for safety specifically, and then it has grown much more into this more expansive role about efficacy. And I think that's important to keep in mind in this whole discussion, but also I think it's important to recognize that the profit motive, it gets... people say, oh, greed, it's terrible and people are doing greedy things. I don't think that self-interest and greed are the same thing. And a company that is motivated by self-interest in the market will be responsive to any concerns that may come about, in that their reputations would be sullied if people were going to be dying because of a particular medication that would be provided and result in death. The profit motive is a protective mechanism.
No, profit is an unalloyed good when honestly earned. What happens, the point I always make to folks is, look, greed and self-interest are both endemic to the human condition. But greed is empowered by government. The fundamental difference between government and enterprise and markets is that government has the force of arms. And whatever agency of government you're talking about, ultimately, they have powerful coercive force that marketplace participants do not. And it can be abused, and it is abused. And certainly Big Pharma has certain advantages that they have sought to press because, again, human beings are opportunistic. So that's why, markets provide that dynamic balance of self-interest on the part of all parties. Government can distort that. So there is every reason to be skeptical of government, if not even more skeptical. So yes, do we rely on the folks at the FDA and at the CDC to do their jobs and with incredible dedication? We do. But look what happened. Look what happened with the tests for COVID-19, and I do not blame President Trump for this in the slightest, because at some point you have to have some faith in your agencies. And God knows the man has more than enough to do than to micromanage the CDC. But what did they do? They manufactured the test themselves, and
The
they
only
chose,
one allowed.
They didn't even follow their own standards.
Yeah. And it was the only test that was allowed, too, in the United States at the time.
Exactly.
And that's an
Right.
important point. The CDC had a defective and inefficient test that was the only one they
Right.
permitted in the beginning of this pandemic, and that certainly
Exactly.
is something we need to keep in mind as far as the notion of trusting government in these
Exactly.
areas. And Nan Hayworth, I want to ask you about right to try in just a moment, but I do want to play real quick one more clip of Milton Friedman in Cut 3 when he gets into the discussion of, in his view, abolishing the FDA, but particularly listen to how he frames it.
So your view is abolish the FDA.
Absolutely.
And what comes up
What
in
comes
its
up
place?
is it's in the self-interest of pharmaceutical companies not to have these bad things. Do you think the manufacturer of thalidomide made a profit out of thalidomide or lost?
I see. Okay.
And you have to have, people should be responsible for harm that they do. It should have been possible.
So tort law takes care of a lot of this.
Absolutely.
All right. If Lilly or Merck or somebody else comes up with a drug that does me harm, I go after them. I join a class action with everybody else who's taken that pill, and we sue them for billions of dollars and wipe out their shareholders' equity.
Absolutely. And
Seeing that, they have every interest to be
Right.
extremely rigorous in testing that drug before they make it available.
Now, neither of us in this discussion is talking about abolishing the FDA, but I do think that
Right.
what Friedman was saying is very apropos of this discussion as far as what would happen otherwise. I want to talk for a minute about right to try, this idea that if there is a life-saving medication that's just being tested, going through the approval process, those kinds of things, and you want to try it, that you should be able to do so. We had right to try legislation that President Trump signed into law, but still, as I understand it, and Dr. Jeffrey Singer talked about it earlier, you still have to show that you've exhausted all the other options before you get to this particular point. Tell us your thoughts, Dr.
Right.
Nan Hayworth, on the right to try concept and the law that was passed.
Well, that's what happens when the precautionary principle is still very highly represented, sort of hypertrophic, especially among American lawmakers and especially among those who are inclined to empower the state, which tends to be on the Democratic side. Fascinatingly enough, obviously, if any nation would be poised to punish malefactors in markets and industry, it would be the United States. And indeed we are, because we have the most litigious society in the world. So we have the double whammy of the threat of litigation, the threat of liability, and that is a powerful fear inducer among practitioners for understandable reasons. So, you combine the precautionary principle with a litigious society, and you kind of have the worst of both worlds when it comes to actually trying to innovate in desperate situations, right? Because you've got, a government that even honoring the principle of, but if there's nothing else, right? Please let them try anything that might save, whatever it is, and let them indemnify the folks who are doing this. There's obviously to have to exhaust every other possibility takes away significant discretion from clinicians, and indeed the right to try law is wonderful in principle, and kudos to President Trump for common sense. I mean, it just literally is compassion and common sense embodied in law for people who are desperate. But that's a reason why it's not more broadly applied.
No, sure.
And it should be modified.
But it is a very critical point to keep in mind that if you, it's so interesting that, look, there are folks on the left who favor physician-assisted suicide, for example. Yet they do not want people to try certain medications that might save their lives because they're worried that they might lose their lives or something. I don't understand that particular contradiction where you're like, sure, go ahead, do physician-assisted suicide, but when it comes to trying a drug that might save your life that the FDA hasn't said, sure, this is all good with us, that's a different story in their mind. I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I think it so much of it, Jimmy, has to do with the fund. As phenomena do in this country and in our government. I mean, this is a profound cause of the struggle we have between the more libertarian among us and those who are more authoritarian. They fundamentally don't trust individuals to be capable of making these decisions. I mean, obviously, I guess, other than for assisted suicide, which is another topic entirely, but fundamentally there is always the assumption that people are going to be either on the patient side too weak, too vulnerable, not capable of making these decisions without the state stepping in prudentially, and on the provider side, from the individual practitioner to industry, a mistrust that somehow there won't be some kind of manipulation or malefaction in some way, profit motive, which God forbid, there should be a profit motive, that will impair the relationship on that side and bias things toward harm. And that's the mindset. If you have that kind of mindset, it's a terrible way to live, and it's the antithesis of what Milton Friedman represented, which was people who are intelligent and empowered and capable and seeking that agency and embracing it and taking responsibility for the results of their decisions. And that is a cultural phenomenon that we are losing in this country. We have generations now indoctrinated in its antithesis.
Dr. Nan Hayworth, just a couple more questions for you. And everything that you were just saying resonated with me in terms of a question that I've asked a number of different guests, including earlier Dr. Deruelle, and especially in this case in the medical context. After this crisis has abated, what lesson do you hope the American people will get, and which do you think they will get? Which is the one, government needs to step it up. It hasn't done enough. It needs to provide for more Medicare for all, so on and so forth. Government needs to do more because we cannot trust the private sector to address these issues, versus the other option, the other lesson, which is we cannot rely on government, whether in crisis or not in crisis, to provide for the needs of the people. And by the way, that maybe add on to that the idea that government shouldn't do it. But the first part of the question is the first part of number two is the key one, I think, which is the idea that we cannot rely upon government. So the question to you is about relying on government more, relying on government less. What do you think is the lesson people will learn and should learn from this?
And that question demonstrates why you are the millennial genius, Jimmy, because that is eternal.
Oh, gosh, do I need to send you another 10, 20? I don't know. I haven't concluded yet how much I'm going to owe you now.
Yeah, well, if you got a fiver, I could use that. But,
all right, keep that in mind.
I ran out of change.
Okay.
But no, that is at the crux of where we how we recover, Jimmy. What nation we will be as we emerge from this epochal crisis, which is literally, it's of the magnitude of a World War II plus 1918 pandemic plus Great Depression, all abruptly happening at the same time. And you're seeing it played out. You're seeing it played out in the Michigan State Capitol. You're seeing it played out in various other states that have elements of their citizenry who feel unfairly imposed upon by overreaching government. And they don't feel trusted with their own common sense. We see it in the state of South Dakota in the positive way. Governor Noem in her state has a citizenry who have been capable of conducting themselves in a way that has thus far minimized the impact of COVID-19 on their population. And this is I think, we're going to remain, in my opinion, Jimmy, we're going to remain a divided nation, because I think people are going to see in this whatever they want to see in it, depending, what's going to, obviously, we're going to see how these early opening states do in the next few days and weeks. Georgia, South Carolina, Colorado. Colorado doesn't get a lot of play in the mainstream media because Jared Polis is Democratic governor, but he's opening up his state on the early side as well. So if they do well, and there's evidence to show, T.J. Rogers of Cypress Semiconductor, founder of Cypress Semiconductor, very smart guy, mapped out death rates at 21 days past first death in states and countries around the world, correlated against versus the time to lockdown, whether it was, 5 days before the first death or, 30 days after the first death, whatever it was, could not find a correlation, interestingly enough. His feeling being lockdowns, his conclusion that is being that lockdowns actually are not the key here. Maybe in areas of urban concentration like New York could be, stands to reason, makes sense. But I think we are going to see in a lot of these blue states that government is failing. New York City is a dumpster fire. So we're going to have plenty to argue about in the months to come.
And make no mistake.
I fall down on this.
Yeah,
but,
well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And make no mistake, we need to be looking more towards how to unleash the unlimited potential of each and every individual, of private sector innovation, of doctor-patient freedom. I mean, those are the key lessons that we all need to learn, to be sure. And I do want to say that you're right, that Jared Polis, being as I'm broadcasting from Colorado, he's my governor, Governor Polis is better than a heck of a lot of other Democrats, but at the same time, there are a lot of local governments and counties that are saying we're extending this a couple of weeks, maybe it will go longer, what have you. But certainly the media doesn't talk about Polis's role, but I'm in a county now where it's been extended by local authorities, unelected bureaucrats, by the way. But nevertheless, I digress, as they say. Former Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Yes, please.
Oh, just very quickly, one universal conclusion that we should all draw is that profligate government in times of peace does us harm. We should be planning and saving and not instituting debt accumulation when we can plan ahead for the future. And that is the Democrats' approach. The Republicans directionally have opposed that kind of government spending. And that is something that universally should be accepted at the end of this. That much I will definitely say.
I agree. And one other point that I think is critical to make is that, look, government has been cutting away the red tape in state after state and at the federal level in terms of some of these drug approvals or the test approving antibody tests and so forth. They've been cutting away the restrictions on physicians being able to practice across state lines and so forth. Why, just in a crisis that is common sense, that we should just say, hey, you're doing this now to streamline a quality of care in the crisis situation. Why not make that a regular occurrence, even in a normal year?
Right, absolutely. No, I think many arguments are to be made in that way. There's government that's the right size. We don't want anarchy. We do need good government, but defining good government means restrained government. And it means yes, that the power, and it's up to folks like us to make sure that folks are deriving the right lessons. But the power, especially in the age of information, the power of knowledgeable citizens in the marketplace applying their talents to solve problems and being accountable for what they do, because that's also the information age, means that we can be more powerful, more independent, and actually do better, much better.
A quote comes to mind. We've been sharing Founding Father quotes, and a quote comes to mind of James Madison, who said, "Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives." I think I got almost verbatim, maybe verbatim, the quote from James Madison, but it is so profound and important. Dr. Nan Hayworth, ophthalmologist, former Congresswoman for New York's 19th Congressional District. Always great to talk with you. We could go on for much longer, but I appreciate your time here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for joining us on a Free to Choose Friday.
Always a privilege. Thanks, Jimmy.
The privilege is all mine. Thank you. Again, Dr. Nan Hayworth, former Congresswoman, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I want to put up one quote as we wrap up today's show. This is John Adams. We put it up before, and we need to see it again, talking about power. Power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak, and that it is doing God's service when it is violating all his laws. It is that first clause. Power always thinks it has a great soul and vast views beyond the comprehension of the weak that is fundamental, and it goes to our basis of government and the basis of the Free to Choose Friday series that we have here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, which is that the powers that be are not more knowledgeable, better than we the people, than the private sector, than the individual who has the capacity to reason. But the elite in Washington, D.C., the bureaucrats, the politicians all too often think that they are in power and they know better. They have greater wisdom, and therefore they must guide the people. They must be in charge. They have the wherewithal to make decisions for folks. It's not how it works. It's not how the Founding Fathers viewed it. That's not certainly how we should view it, and that's not how we do view it here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a great weekend. If you are in Denver, Colorado, the Denver metro area, be sure to tune in to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show on 710 KNUS, 5 to 8 p.m. Mountain. You can also listen live online at 710knus.com. Be sure to do so, and we will be back Monday. My thanks to Dr. Dennis Deruelle and Dr. Nan Hayworth for joining us today, as well as Dr. Jeffrey Singer. Great interview we had a couple of weeks ago. Appreciate you being along for the ride. The Washington Examiner, our partners here. Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire. We will be back Monday working up great shows all throughout the course of the next week. Don't miss a beat. Have a great weekend. Be safe, sound, and well, and healthy. God bless America.